Welcome to another presentation from the CV Academics Foundation, home of the AMP Honors Program.
All right, welcome AMP Honors Program. Today I have the pleasure of sitting down with Chris Simenz. He is one of our advisory board members, and we're just going to go through and kind of elaborate on a couple of the responses that you'll see in this post, and kind of tease out some other things about Chris. So the first, thank you very much for joining us.
Absolutely.
And for everything that you do for the platform and helping grow the AMP Honors community.
So happy to be here. Thanks so much for the opportunity, Brandon. This is great. Looking forward to getting to know the system a bit more and getting to know some of our users.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first question I have for you, you said that starting networking was a big part of kind of how you got to where you are in your career. And I would, as I'm growing in my career, I've started to learn that it's just as important who you know as to what you know, because being able to get yourself into that interview room or get yourself into that position to be able to prove yourself is just as important as being able to do the actual work. So I couldn't agree more with that statement. Is there anything that you kind of did to start networking? I mean, I know it's kind of you sometimes it's you have family friends, you have whoever it is, but when was the point where you really started like, okay, these are the people that I am going to start to connect with for future jobs, for businesses, or just to have good connections, knowing where I want to go?
It's a great question. And so I'll take those a part at a time. I started out incredibly fortunate that my mother worked in healthcare my whole life as a kid. So I was around people that were practitioners of a variety of types. She started out as a nurse. She wound up as a healthcare administrator. So I found myself around medical professionals of all types on a regular basis. And the thing that got me started was that I was a curious kid, and probably that I didn't know when to shut up. So I always asked questions. Let's be honest about it. So those questions led me to opportunities and led me to contacts and connections that I never otherwise would have had. Now, that didn't necessarily translate into what I wanted to do. I think I decided at that point, based on those connections, that I didn't want to go to medical school, which was an important decision for me as well, but led me to a different healthcare path. What I see differing today with students is that we prepare students really well in the academic pathway, specifically in schools, to perform academically, but we don't necessarily instill in students the need to go out and make connections in the field. And one of the things that I'd say is essential, and that I had to learn to do on my own, but that I think that we can provide and support students in doing a better job of, is being mindful about making connections to areas of interest and exploring. I think we have students that think at age 16 and 17, they're certain they want to be a physical therapist or a physician or a nurse practitioner or whatever have you. And that's great to have that interest and that excitement. But when you go out and you actually start exploring the field, I think you come away with a far more mature and a far more well-intended and thought out pathway for yourself.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that answer. Thank you very much. So next question I have for you. You said that when you judge a successful day, you judge it off three things. Did I learn? Did I support my community? Is my family happy? I love that. I think that's something that can be, even if you have a tough day in some areas, you can still kind of find the little things to say, okay, this may not have been my best day, but it's still a successful day. I met these three areas. I love to hear it. Has that always been how you judged having a successful day?
It's a great question, Brandon. No, it hasn't. Okay, so I was educated in a school system that valued academic performance, competition, and earning high marks. I found out the hard way that those high marks are relatively arbitrary, and that if you can't tie them to something more meaningful, and if you can't tie your experiences on the job to something more meaningful, that becomes pretty empty, pretty hollow, because they're not giving out scratch and sniff Snickers to professionals in this field if you have a great job done at the end of the day. And one of the things that's been most important to me, I'm a community engaged researcher, and community engagement as such is a relatively new and emerging field. So I had to stumble a lot to find out where I needed to be and to get to where I am today. And what I found out from that, Brendan, is that failure is one of the best teachers, and failure is one of the best indicators and markers of success. So for me, it becomes really important when I say, did I learn at the end of the day? I learned far more from failures than I do from successes. Now, this doesn't mean fail in a big way, go out and try and do something foolish or stupid. This means that put yourself on the edge and take chances and really push, whether it's for equity, whether it's for a good outcome, for a health intervention or other. And then at the end of the day, take stock. And when I take stock, I feel like if I'm working hard, if I'm using my resources and pushing my boundaries, I'll always learn something. Have I helped my community? I'm fortunate in that that part has always been a part of who I am, and that was instilled by my mother. I grew up as a kid volunteering at a nursing home. I wound up after that volunteering in community centers. I volunteered at the YMCA to ref basketball. Volunteerism and serving others has just been something that's always been interesting to me and that was instilled in me at an early age. And what I find is that if you're approaching a healthcare career or a STEAM career, support of others and that need to be altruistic and really have empathy for other people is an essential part of it. And you can grow that through practice. And the last thing, I guess I never really thought about family, until I had one. I mean, my family, my parents were always incredibly important to me. But as my family grew, I've got a wonderful partner in my wife, Stacy, who's a nursing instructor as well, who also is in the healthcare field, closely tied to what we do. And then 2 kids, and their joy is my joy. Their sorrow is my sorrow. So I'm far more happy at the end of the day if they've had a good day than if I can say I've had a good day.
Well, I guess I couldn't really ask for a better response to that. I think that is phenomenal that you kind of touch on some different areas. So even if you have kind of a bad day in one area, it doesn't just completely ruin your whole day. I'm a very big believer in that. I mean, even kind of my athletic background, it's the next play. Like, okay, you messed that play up. You can't do anything about that. The only thing that can hurt it is now it's hurting the next play. So I love to hear that mentality of being able to kind of check off the list. And even if you don't, say, all right, well, what can I do tomorrow to kind of help me in that way? So that's awesome.
It's a great point that you brought up right there, Brandon. I think one of the things that I learned, one of the skills that I learned that was useful is being mindful. And not only being mindful, but being reflective. And you hit on it right there. If you make mistakes, you're not going to learn anything from them unless you think about them, unless you take stock of what you've done and take stock of what you might do differently going forward. And thankfully, I've made a ton of mistakes in my career, but I've had people that gave me plenty of grace and let me learn from those mistakes and become a better professional as a result. And it's the getting over the fear of making those mistakes that allows me to continue to push forward successfully.
Teasing out the last part of that, do you believe that it becomes any easier to push yourself to be on that edge, knowing that you can make that mistakes as you start making more and seeing the correlation between, okay, I made these mistakes, but now I learned, and that's what got me to that next point?
It's a really interesting question. I think there's a lot of context there. I'd argue for some people that making a mistake can be a lot more costly than for others, right? Nicking an artery during surgery is very different than saying the wrong words to a group of students or a group of community members. So I think they're all relative, but I would say that you always need to push. If you find yourself too comfortable in your situation, whether it be in school, whether it be in a job, whether it be in clinical internship, volunteerism, or other, you're probably not putting yourself in the position to be ultimately successful. So find comfort in the people around you, find comfort in the environment, but find ways to challenge yourself to do just a little bit more or to think about things just a little bit differently, and you'll continue to move. So I've grown that over time, and I think it gets easier to fail. I think it does because now I've put myself in a position where I expect it, where I expect that if I'm working at optimal capacity, there are going to be times where I just don't meet my requirements, where my outcome isn't exactly what I wanted, but that's okay. The hard part is giving yourself permission for that. We have a school system that tends to value perfection and an artificial perfection, whether it be a perfect grade point average, a perfect ACT score, or whatever have you. When you get out into the clinical and working world, specifically around health and wellness, that perfection isn't possible. We can strive for it all day long. We'll never get there. So we have to think about how we make ourselves better in an imperfect world, in an imperfect situation on a day-to-day basis.
So based off of that answer, do you think that you have started to build your own kind of personal criteria of okay, I'm failing, but I'm learning, versus I'm failing and this is like, kind of, how do you judge, like, okay, I really need to make some changes, or maybe I just need to try again. I just didn't do one little thing right, or it's, no, this isn't working. Like, I kind of, not like how to tell students to keep pushing through, or when maybe it's not quitting, but this is a smart idea to walk away from. This is going to drain a lot more than it's going to give you.
So I don't know if you meant to do this, Brandon, but this is actually the perfect segue to your first question. So this is going to be total loop back to the start. You have to talk to people and you have to rely on your network. If I lived in a vacuum and all I had was my own reflection and my own opinion about my outcomes, about my process, and about whether or not I was successful, it would get really lonely and I would get really insulated, and it would be difficult for me to gauge that. So in my job, I'm a community researcher. I get to talk to my community partners. I get to talk to my constituents. I get to talk to the community members that I'm working with. And everybody's got opinions on how things are going on my job and everything else. And I use all of that information to make informed decisions that continue to drive me forward. So what I'd say is, specifically in healthcare, it's a collaborative field. It is interdepartmental, it's intersegmental, it is interfield. So get as many voices out there as possible, and use those voices to your advantage. Listen to the feedback that you get. Ask your teachers, ask your mentors, ask clinicians that you shadow for feedback or for their approach. And the more you gain, we always talk about adding to your toolbox in our field. The more you add to that toolbox, so that you're better equipped to take on the next challenge.
Yeah, that worked perfectly. How we came right back around full circle. So I don't have any more questions for you. I don't know if there's anything else that you would like to tell the students. I mean, this is not going to be the last time that they're going to see your face. For any of you students out there, if anything that we talked about today resonated with you, or if you find Chris to be an interesting person, which I don't know how you can't, but if you have any questions for him, if you think that's something that he does is something that you would like to talk about or to learn more about, feel free to reach out to any of us on the platform, reach out to Chris. This is what this platform is all about, is building a community.
Thanks, Brandon. Yeah, this is what I do. So anybody have any interest, anybody wants to talk further, I'd love to do so. Nothing better in my job than sharing what I'm passionate about with others, and then hearing what you're passionate about, because by taking those steps, by reaching out and by using the resources around you, you're only going to start to build that better profession, that better next step. So I'm looking forward to hearing from some of you. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, on behalf of the whole CVA team, thank you very much for doing this. We like to kind of highlight our advisory board. We're so proud of everybody that's on there. So getting the platform to be able to see a little bit different side of you guys, not just as the professional, but kind of who you are. There's going to be the whole interview attached with this. So people are going to get to learn a little bit more about you.
Appreciate it, Brandon. Thanks so much. Have a great night.
You as well.
This has been a presentation of the CV Academics Foundation, home of the AMP Honors Program.